Hey there everybody, and welcome back. For those of you that are looking to create your own recipe sharing app or just something similar to that, completely free without code, stay tuned. We're going to be making that throughout this video. Now, for those of you that wonder how this is going to be completely free, we're using a tool called Appgyver.com. So at this time, if I'm not mistaken, those making 10 million or less in revenue can use this tool completely free, no credit cards required. We'll be using Firebase for a free database and Unsplash.com for free commercial pictures. So if you have any questions, check out those websites in advance. They'll all reflect basically what I just said. Now, if you have any questions, drop them in the comment box below. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe and check out the channel for new content. Now, those of you that have been following me, I have a lot of different tutorials similar to this, so I'm going to try to keep this short, sweet, and to the point. If you head to this URL right here, it'll take you to Appgyver's homepage. You can sign up or sign in the top right-hand corner. Basically, just click Create New Project, and you're going to land in a dashboard that looks just like this. So I'm going to show you what I've done to get you all caught up to this point. I tried to do some of the basics early on, just so we would have kind of like a little bit of a teaser to show you, but also to make sure that the harder stuff was already done to streamline the video. So this is going to be your home page you'll land on. If you need to create a new page, in the top left, you click this button and you just click Add New Page, and then you just save the page, and that's all there is to it. It'll drop you in a page just like this. Now you have your component market on the left, so you can drag an item. It's what we call like a WYSIWYG editor. What you see is what you get, or drag and drop interface. When you drop the component in, you will then see your content and your settings over here to make changes to this particular component. You can also select components from this tree over here, and you can also use this to reorganize them. So basically, components on the left, user interface in the middle, settings on the right, and the tree on the right as well. Now, if you want to edit the settings in more detail, you would simply just go to the bottom, and this determines the actions or logic behind each individual component. So if you wanted someone to touch this and it take them to a new page, a basic example, you would drag over Open Page, and then you would simply connect this to this. You'll click on this open page, and basically you'll just select what page you want it to open, and you click Save. And when you save this and distribute your app, now this will open the test page, which ironically is the page we're already on, if this paragraph is clicked. So very, very simple. But we're going to delete that and save our changes. And now we're going to go ahead and truly jump in. So on the home page here, I have my terrible layout with my terribly looking or just terrible looking application. So I didn't really put too much effort into this portion, I'm sure you can tell. And that's primarily because I just wanted something here. So the way that this app functions, we have 3 pictures, and each picture, when you click it, is going to take you to a different page. So what I did was I dragged over a card, and then in the card properties, so you click the card, I just changed the name and the content to be what you see here. And then I clicked on the background image, and then I clicked on formula. And then in between these 2 quotes, I pasted in an image URL. So here's a sample of how you do this. You can go to any image, making sure that you can use it for commercial use. I'd recommend finding the actual image itself, and we're going to right click and just click Copy Image URL. And then when you paste it in the quotes in here, and click Save and Save, you'll notice that image now pops up in the background. The tricky part is you want to avoid the mistake that I made where, as you can tell, the text is not very easily visible. If you want to change that, very, very simple. So we'll click on this dessert one, and you can click the Edit button on the card to get more edit options. And we'll click Title, and we'll go over to Style, and let's try changing this to the center. So now dessert is more clearly visible, and you could do the same for paragraph if you wanted to edit the paragraph. Not all components are like this, but the card is a little bit more complex. So we'll just double click off the screen, and now you'll see those changes have been saved. So at this point, I would recommend figuring out what you want your home page to look like, and go ahead, pause this video, jump in and add all of those cards or whatever it is you want first, and then pick up with what we're going to do next. So next thing that we need to do is we need to add a page for each one of these options. So essentially for pasta, maybe you wanted to have one for dessert, maybe you want 20 cards. You want to do one for fish or one for every kind of meat or one for specific countries and the food that they have or the recipes that you could offer up or others could share. Things of that nature. Figure that out. Drop those cards in. Go ahead and make a page for each one. So we're going to go ahead and jump in, make sure that these pages are linked. So we're going to click on this first one, click Add Logic to Card, and do what we just did not too long ago. We're going to drag over Open Page. We're going to connect the node. In Open Page, we will then click this option here, and we are going to go to Pasta. That's the name of the page I want us to go to when we click on this option. Now, we're going to go to this Pasta page, and we are going to start making some edits or changes. Now, before we do this, we need to get our database set up. So you should already have Firebase opened up and again Unsplash in a new tab. I would recommend jumping over to Firebase, get your Google account set up, and then this is basically your landing page. So we'll click Get Started. And then from here, we're going to click Add Project. So I'm going to walk you through this step by step. So we're just going to call this Test 1 because I'm going to delete this when we're done with this video. Scroll down, I'll keep Analytics and Default and Create Project. This does not take too long. We're looking at maybe 30 to 60 seconds. So while that's done in the background, we're going to go ahead and get this set up. So we have our paragraph up here, or our title, which basically is just this text. So this is the title, this is a paragraph. So we will go ahead and kind of get started with the next couple of pieces. So what we're going to want is a form where people can actually publish recipes and kind of like submit them, so to speak. So in this tutorial, we're not going to cover how to get specific user accounts. This is just going to be a generic, anyone can post publicly. It's not attaching a name or anything like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag over an input field, another input field, and then we're going to bring over a button. So input field, first thing we're going to do is we're going to put recipe name, and then we're going to put recipe instructions. And then the button is just going to say submit exclamation point. So we're going to click save right now. And then we are going to be a little quick. So we're going to jump over to Firebase and click continue as this is now ready. Now what we're going to do from here is we're going to go to Firestore database. And then at this point, we're going to click create database. Now you can start in production mode or test mode. The tricky thing about this is you need to worry about your security rules, which we'll cover in a second. So choose this, bear in mind the location settings for your, just kind of read this message, and I would recommend clicking learn more to make sure you're choosing the right option. I'm going with the default just because, again, I don't really need this too much right now. It should take between 20 and 40 seconds, maybe longer, to go ahead and get all of this set up. And the first thing that we're going to do, which I highly recommend you avoid skipping this step if possible, we're going to update our security rules. Don't let this intimidate you. If you see right now this says if false, this means no one can read, no one can write, which means this database is essentially closed off. So you need to look up what security rules work for your specific application. I can't really tell you what's best for you. I'm going to set this to completely open for the purpose of this video just by deleting that and leaving this as is. You will get a notification that this is public, so anyone can steal, modify, or delete the data. That's fine with me. I'm not really worried about it. We'll click Start Collection, and this collection name is going to be Pasta. And then the document ID is going to be Recipe 1. And we really only had 2 fields, but if you need to add more, do it in advance so you don't need to reconfigure your data variable. So essentially make sure you have all the fields you need up front. It's not going to make or break it later on, but it's just a lot easier. So we are going to have name, which is going to be the name of our recipe, and then we're going to have the actual recipe. So we will put my favorite, and these are just sample values here, and then the recipe 1, cook the food, and that's all I'm going to put. I mean, I don't really need much here. This is just to create sample data. So that's now set up. So the next thing that we need to do is jump over here. So we now need to get this information connected. So you have a couple of options, but first things first, we have to click Data, and then we have to go to Data Resources and click Add Resource, and we're going to do REST API Direct Integration. All right, so once we have this page pulled up here, we're going to be using this document, which I will provide in the description. So we are essentially starting with highlighting this information here. And this is the resource ID is basically just going to be your name for this. I'm going to call it pasta, and then we'll just put pasta recipes. These are really more so for your reference. Then we're going to paste in the first part of the URL. We'll go to get, and then we're pasting in the second part of the URL. Now you'll notice there are 2 sections that are in all caps, or 2 words. This is what I did to hopefully help you all. So you can figure out all of the information you need by clicking on Go to Docs from Firebase. You can search up here and learn all about the API if you want to learn more. For those of you who just want the crash course, actually not even a crash course, we're just going to give you what you need for this. If you are at this page where I am now, so I'm just clicking on a random collection in my Firestore, you'll see up here a URL that looks like this. Even if the URL changes over time, ideally you're going to see your project name in the URL. You're going to need to copy everything in between these 2 slashes right here, and that is going to replace the text name in all caps. Then you need the document. So the document is recipe 1. So what we're going to do is, in this document, we're just going to put recipe 1. Now, down here in response key path, we're just putting the text documents. And then we're going to click over to test and click run test. Now you'll see there's an error returned. So what we need to do is double check and make sure that this was copied over correctly. So we're going to go over here, recipe 1 appears to be correct. So now I'm going to show you how to troubleshoot this. We're going to look for the URL and paste this info in, and then see what ends up coming in online. So this is the URL that we want. And you'll notice the information, we have recipe, cook the food, name, my favorite. So what basically we're doing is we're telling Appgyver to pull this info and then clean it up and make it look a little bit more attractive. So we're just going to make sure that I pulled everything in correctly. So when you paste in your URL, again with your name here and document/pasta, so it looks like I misspoke. I put pasta as the collection, not the document. So what we need to do here is we're just going to make that change. And then we're going to go back over to test and click run test. And you'll see now it returns this info. Now you will need this later. So what I would recommend is go ahead and take this part from the description and fill this out as well. So this is going to be your project name, and then this is going to be the collection name. So I can actually go ahead and make that change now. And then what this will do is any updates to this collection are going to be made in that document online. So you'll be able to pull this in essentially real time. So this pulled in correctly. Now we need to tell Appgyver what to do with it. So we're going to say set schema from response. And you'll see it splits things up a little bit. You don't need to worry too much about this. We're just going to click save. And this has essentially saved this data resource. So now we can close this, and we're now going to set up how people post to this data resource. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to set up an HTTP post request within Appgyver and kind of work through things a little bit further. So right here, we are going to look over in the components, and we actually have to download this. So if you click on flow function market, and we just type in HTTP, and then you are looking for an HTTP request, and we'll just click install and drag it over. It's that simple to get new components. We'll drag it. Basically, when the button is clicked, this HTTP request needs to go out. Well, this is actually pretty simple since we already have this information. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this URL that we've already typed in once over here. And we're going to make this a post request, which basically says users are pushing this data to this area. And then you have optional inputs. So you'll have essentially the ability to add in your values and get things set up, which we'll do shortly. We just need to get those data resources set up, or data variables set up. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set up those data variables. So we're going to click on this slider here, and we are going to click over here to data variables, add data variable, pasta, and save. And this is going to give us access to essentially what we just created. So it's giving us access to this schema right here. Now what we need to do is we need page variables as well. So we need a page variable called name and a page variable called recipe. Now what we're doing with this is we're essentially telling this, okay, what we need to do is we need the information saved in these two sections to actually be able to make this HTTP request. So we just click on this, and when you click here, you click value, and then you click data and variables, page variable, name, and you can set a preview if you want, but it's not necessary. And then we're going to go here and repeat the process, page variables, recipe, save. Now, with both of these, we now actually have data saved in the application to submit. So when we click this button, we need to now configure this to set it up to where, okay, we have the post request here. We know where it's going, but what's going where? So this is where we're actually going to set up the headers, request body, etc. So here's where it gets a little tricky, so make sure you pay close attention. So we're going to click on the request body or the little ABC next to it, and we're going to type or click formula. And then from here, we're going to delete what we have, and we're going to encapsulate what we're about to put in these curly brackets. So put 2 of those. And then we're going to go over here, and we are going to highlight the double quotes before fields, all the way down to this second bracket. Now, this is going to look different based on how many values you have. So what you need to know is there's fields at the top regardless of how many fields you have. So you're going to take the double quote from before fields, even if you have 20. Let's just say you have recipe, name, additional information, 40 other values. At the end of it, just before created time and updated time, is a series of 2 brackets. So you're going to copy from the second bracket all the way up to fields. And again, just make sure fields, the double quotes is first, and these last 2 brackets are last. Control or Command C, jump over here, and we will paste this in. And now essentially what we need to tell the system is what's what. So we're sending data to Appgyver at this point, or to Firebase at this point. So what we're doing here is we're going to delete what's in double quotes, which should be your first string value, and we're going to replace this with the page variable. So if you type in page, you should be able to scroll through. If they have a bunch of theme options, there's another shortcut to this. You can click page variables, and we'll double click on name. So what this is saying is, in the field recipe, the string value is going to be whatever's in the page variable for name. So if you remember, we just created that. Then we're going to repeat the process for the next variable. So this is why you want to name things properly or in a way that makes sense. So we're going to do the next variable, and it looks like I actually put mine backwards. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put page variables recipe, and then the string value over here for name is going to be the page variable for name. So essentially, the best way to read and understand this is telling us in fields, there's recipe, which we have right here. And then we have a name, which is my favorite. So if we go over here, you'll see name, my favorite. So when we're sending information, we're basically deleting my favorite and cook the food, and we're telling the system in the name and in the recipe fields in Firebase, add the information that is the equivalent to whatever the user put in this app in Appgyver. So you'll see we have the name and the recipe. So now we're just going to click Save. And that's really all there is to it. You leave the request body the same, and that is essentially set. Now, if you want, you can do if-then statements. If you check out the series that's going to be in the description below, you might have to thumb through it because it is pretty lengthy. But you could set up some if-then statements to make sure these aren't empty, but I don't really think that's going to be necessary because of how simple this is. So let's go ahead and test it because we've been at this for a little while and we want to see some progress from what we've actually been doing. So if you click Launch App Preview, these are all the apps I've been working on. So we're now going to go over to Food Are Good. And you'll see this looks massive. We can right-click and click Inspect. This is our little shortcut to see what this would look like as a mobile app. Don't get intimidated. You don't need to know any of this coding stuff on the right. This is a developer tool built into Chrome. You're going to deselect this option and select this. And then it gives you the option to choose what application this appears on, or what device this appears on. So we're simply just going to try iPhone X, or let's go with Galaxy S5. So we're going to scroll up and down, click on Pasta. It took us to this page. So now we need to test this and see if it works. So we have recipe name and instructions. Let's put test, tester, submit. Now, you'll notice we didn't put any message notifications, so now we just need to go over here, and you'll see if we scroll down, we have test and tester. So we'll try one more. We'll just put sample name and instructions, submit. And sometimes you may have to click it twice if it doesn't register. And you'll see right here, sample name, instructions. So that's great, but now we have one last thing to do to make this look a little bit more attractive, because people are submitting stuff, but they don't see any recipes down here. So here's what we're going to do to fix this. We're going to add in, you have a couple of choices. I personally think it's better to do image list item, or a large image list item. So you can do a scroll view if you want this view to be scrollable, but I'm just going to drop in a container so that everything is contained within this area. And I'm going to put a little divider in between. Actually, this, we're going to put it beneath the button. So we may, let's see, sometimes you have to be a little careful about where you drop these. So we want this to be in between the button and the actual container, not in the container. Then we're going to drop in a large image list item. And what we're going to do here is we're going to select this, and we want to see everything the database has. So we're going to click repeat with, and then we're going to go to data and variable, data variable. And this is the data variable we added a minute ago. You'll see it added the 1 to the end just like it did when we saved it. And now this tells the system for every instance there's a document here. repeat this. Now, if you see 3 more in shaded down here in the shaded area, that's not the number you have. That's just letting you know this is essentially repeated. Then we need to tell it what's going to show up here. So here's a couple of options. And if you want to add something that's visually appealing, and just to make sure you all know how to essentially make changes, so I want to teach you some troubleshooting here as well. So we're going to start out just by testing this and go to ABC on the title and go to Formula. And we're going to delete all of this. And we're going to go to Data Variables. And we're going to go to Data Pasta Fields Name and save. If you see it's red and it looks like there's an error, don't worry about that. And then description text, data item and repeat. And I apologize, I did it wrong the first time around, so we're going to change that. That'll actually be for something separate. So we're going to click on the label data item and repeat, and then we're going to go to the string value for name. And then we're going to repeat for the description text or for the recipe. This is what's going to allow this information to repeat down. So we have a couple of choices at this point. So we're just going to click Save here and see what this looks like in our app. So you'll see it automatically updated, my favorite, test, sample name. Well, now we're deciding, you know what, I realized that we didn't add a picture before. So here's where we're going to go through a little bit of changing how this is set up. So we're going to give users the option to add in, if they're interested, let's just say an image URL. Now, I'm not going to do this with you. I'm going to show you how to do it, and then if you have questions, you can drop them in the comment box below. So you're going to have to bring over this input field, and you're going to call this image URL. Unfortunately, I don't really have the ability to walk you through how to do actual image uploads, so it would have to be only the URL to that image. If you don't want that, then instead of using this image list item, use a different one like a paragraph and make it super simple. But for this, we're going to copy what we did before. So in label, you're going to call this image URL. The value you have to select, so you're going to have to go to variables, page variables, and you're going to add a page variable for image URL. You will then save that. Then what you're going to have to do is go over to Firebase and add a field for, actually you have to start off to make your life easier by removing these. And you're going to just work with one, and you're going to add a field for image URL, and then the value would just be any random image. So we'll just copy image address just to test it and make sure that it works. So at this point, what we're doing is we're basically telling the system, hey, we want to render the image from this address. So you'll see now we have 3 in here. So we will jump back over to Appgyver, and we're going to go to data variables. Now myself, being a little paranoid, I will typically remove this data variable. I'll click save, and then I will go to data. I'll click on pasta. We don't make changes to the URL at all. We just go to test and run test. And now we have a new schema because we now have image URL. So we just set schema from the response, click save, and then we go back and we go to data again. And essentially, we're adding that data variable that we just deleted. And really no changes should need to be made. So basically you updated the schema and now told Appgyver, hey, there's 3 data variables, not 2. So the last thing, if you recall, is we now need to go to submit and change the logic for this. So we'll go to our HTTP request, and then all we really need to change is the request body. So we can refresh this page, and you're doing the same thing we did before. Copy the last 2 curly brackets up to the text fields, and then you're going to paste that in here, and you're going to encapsulate that within 2 more curly brackets, And you simply replace the string value, so we'll delete the double quotes for name, and we will put the page variable for that, so name and recipe. So simply double click for the corresponding one. Then you'll go delete the other string value for recipe, and then you'll delete the string value. So right here, although it may look kind of ominous, you're just deleting this URL, and then you are adding in the page variable for that image URL. Now you'll notice I don't have one here, and that's because I kind of want you to walk through this on your own. So if you remember to add that, simply go to Data, go over to Variables, Page Variables, and just add a new one. Now once you've added in that page variable, you can finish editing this HTTP request just like I just did. And then from there, you just make sure that that page variable is assigned as a value here. So you have your image URL dropdown, you'll have your value, you have your formula, and you would basically, if you're interested, you could set up the formula for it and test your knowledge, or you can just go to Data and Variables, Page Variables, and select your newly created page variable. Then you just test it. Now, if you want the image to show down here, for background image, as this is a data item in repeat, basically you're just going to select the image and do what we've already done. Click this button, click here, image URL, and click Save. Now this is automatically going to render that image specifically. So if you look over here, we'll click Save, which forces a refresh on this page, and you'll see now we have that image in the background. Now, if you would rather have the image in this little image location here, then you would simply replace this info. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a formula, and we're just going to delete this. And we'll just put double quotes and click Save. Now if you want it in the other source or other area, repeat the process, data item and repeat, image URL, save, and now you have it over here on the left-hand side. And this will make the app a little bit more visually appealing. Now the last thing that we need to do is set this to be clickable, because at this point the user sees this, but they can't view the full item. So let's go ahead and get that set up. All right, so at this point we are going to go to the item page for this. If you don't have one, it's because I haven't told you to make one yet, so don't get worried there. Just go to your pages, click Add New Page, and you have to create an item page for basically each of the categories. So I'll show you what I mean here. I have a pasta recipe item page. This information is going to basically auto-populate when we set this up correctly. So we will drag over an image, and we're going to create 3 page parameters. Now, if you're wondering what these are basically items that are passed over from another page. So we're going to add 3, and the first one we will just call it, I'm sure you guessed, name, and then recipe. Then lastly, image URL, and you'll add parameters for every piece of information you want passed over. Then we have to assign the value. So we'll go to Content, and then we'll go to Data and Variables, Page Parameter, Name, Save. Repeat the process for every item or option that you have. So Page Parameter, Recipe, Save. If your image disappeared like mine, that's because there's no value. So you can click it in the tree, go to Source, Data and Variables, and then you would, I'm sure you guessed, Page Parameter. And you'll notice this one won't work. So we have to do a little bit of a cheat for this. So we'll click on Source once more, but now we're going to go to Formula, and we're going to do the formula for the page parameter. So we simply click Page Parameters, Image URL. You'll see that it gives us an error. Don't worry about it. We'll just click Save. And if it doesn't render here, don't worry about that either. So we will now save this page, and we're going to jump back to Pasta. Now the cool thing is you don't have to create a new item page for every one of these items. This essentially will show you how this works. So when we click on an item, we want it to open the page, and we'll select open, and we're going to open the pasta page or the pasta recipe, which is what I called that page. Now what we're going to do is, if you scroll down, once you've selected that page, you'll notice here are the parameters we just had. So the image URL, we want this to be essentially the data item in repeat for image URL. And the reason we're using data item in repeat and not the data variables or anything else is this action here is going to be repeated for each of these items with their specific information. So we want to make sure to use data item in repeat for the corresponding values. That way this action is effectively replicated. And then we'll go to current, and we will repeat for the recipe. It doesn't matter what your information is named, by the way. You just need to make sure that you're selecting the corresponding values. You can follow along with what I'm doing. You can pass over 5 variables, 1. It doesn't really matter. So at this point, we've saved it. So it should refresh over here. So let's go back to the home page and let's test our final app. So we're at the home page. We scrolled a little bit. You can see my terrible color coordination. We'll click pasta. We have everything here. Now you'll notice we only have one food option. So let's do a new recipe. We'll call this final. And we'll put 1, cook, 2, eat. Image URL. Let's go find an image somewhere on Appgyver or on Unsplash, sorry. So we will copy this image address and we'll drop that in here and we'll click submit. Now essentially we're just waiting to see if it updates, and you'll see here it is. So final came through, cook, eat. The image didn't populate, so we'll need to double check and see why that is. But we're going to click this, and as you can tell, this came through without any issues whatsoever. So the last step is just going to be to figure out what happened with this image URL. It looks like the image URL came through correct on here, so we just may need to double check and try to do it one more time just to see. So we will go back to the home page, pasta, and we're just going to type A, and we'll try pasting this in one more time. And if this doesn't work, we'll do our final, essentially like testing session. So that didn't work. So now what we need to do is click on this item and make sure that the correct info is coming through. So image source is going to be current fields string value. And we'll see here, let's see, image URL, web URL. We'll click save. Then we just need to make sure that everything is repeated correctly. So all of that should be working. So at this point, what we are going to do, just to be safe, is we're going to try a different image. So we're going to right-click this one, copy image address. And the cool thing is we actually have the ability to make changes from within this database on the back end. And you can already tell, here's our last issue to kind of figure out together. Why does this one have 3 fields and this one only has 2? Well, if you noticed, that was because when I created this submit button and I added in the data, the post request body, I never added in an image URL. So if you want to sort of cheat and try to figure out how to do this, you can follow along if you don't want to go through and copy all of this over again. So let's close that and kind of figure this out together. So you'll see we have fields, and within fields there is this recipe, and it closes, and then the name, and that closes. So essentially we just want to repeat what is showing up here. So we can just copy this, and we're just going to paste it right after. and we're going to follow along with essentially the scheme that they've been using. And then name is going to be replaced with image URL. And then the page variable is going to be replaced. And since we didn't add a page variable for it, what we are going to need to do is make sure that that is created. So we'll put image URL, and we'll save this. And now we need to make sure that we add a page variable for image URL. And we'll click save. And now let's go through and test this one more time. So we're going to delete these from Firebase. And I also want to show you how this works. So when you click Start Delete, within the application, it's almost instantaneous. So we'll put final, final, and let's paste in a new image URL. Submit. And you'll see it's loading here, so we're just going to check and see if the image URL came through correctly. And it doesn't look like it did, so we're going to have to, at this point, we're going to have to cheat a little bit. Now, at this point, based on following my steps, if you're experiencing the same error, I really want to test you and see if you could pause this for a second, minimize this menu, and I want you to try to figure out what the problem is. So in the post request, you'll notice that we have all the information correct. If we go over to Firebase, it came through. So at this point, you may be wondering, okay, when I'm submitting it, everything's going through, what could be wrong? One thing you may be forgetting, I never made a value and associated it. So basically, we're sending an image URL that's blank. So all we really need to do here is assign the image URL page variable, and the problem is solved. So now that we've kind of run through this a lot, we're going to go to Pasta, and you'll see we have final here. That will not update, unfortunately. So here we're going to put we did it, and we're just going to put instructions, and then in the URL, we will paste that URL and click submit. And we're basically just going to wait for it to update, and there it is, we did it. So for your troubleshooting steps, because a lot of people get stumped with these requests, make sure you have your data resource refreshed with the updated schema by running the test and setting the schema. Make sure that you have updated your data variable, and make sure that all of your page variables correspond to their specific area. Lastly, we're going to click on the item, and you'll see it worked as intended. We did it, instructions. And then if we go back to this page, you can set up additional navigation if you wanted a back button, but we'll click on my favorite. There it is. So you'll see that although not very attractive, this gives you enough to work with. So at this point, here's what I want you to do. Play around with this, figure out what works best for you, and then repeat those steps for all of the other categories you have. So this laid the groundwork for pasta, or whatever this category is called. You can follow these steps for all of the next couple. And the cool part about this is, once this is published to Google Play or wherever you want to submit it, you can then update in the database without pushing an update to the user. So what I mean by that is, if you want to make changes to the application itself, you have to publish updates. But when I click on this, as you can tell, I can update this information from within Firebase without pushing updates to all the users. So this gives you the ability to, for example, go in here and click Add Document. We can call this Pasta, and kind of repeat the steps to make something just like this. So let's go with final, and we're going to have to follow the same naming convention, but you can go with name, recipe, image URL, and we can just put A. For the image URL, we'll use the same one, and we'll click save. And then typically what will happen here is now that option has popped up. So that's the reason you would want to use a database, so that you can make regular, consistent changes and they'll reflect in the interface. So at this point, we've gone through how to make the application, again, replicate these steps for the following pages that you have, play around with the design, figure out what works best for you. If you want to edit your page layouts, just click on page layout in the tree and you can update the styling and color here. And then you can use scroll views or containers if you want to make the pages a little bit more scrollable or work a certain way. Don't forget to test things out on this launch page or use Appgyver's preview app. And then really the last thing to cover at this point is if you're ready and you want to publish to the App Store, check out the series that I listed below. I will also put a link to the How to Publish to Google Play. If you want to go to a web app or to the Apple App Store, check out Appgyver's forums to do that. But all the resources are below. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment box, and I'll see you all in the next video.